Ananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Excuse me. Kankaroti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yatkrapatamahang Bande Shri Gurum Dinataram Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamaham Dadati Swapadantikam Shakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhobhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Welcome back, I guess, to our regular, our resumption of our regular programming. The holiday Madhuvan specials have now ended, and it's back to us. And so I want to continue. It looks like we have a nice intimate group today. I want to continue the discussion of Guru Tattva, especially as framed by the first three angas of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, given by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So previously, last time, I spoke generally about the importance of Sakyarati. We don't have an interpreter, so I don't need to worry about that. It looks, I don't see the button, so I guess we're.
Yeah, not yet. If someone comes during the call.
Okay, so when I see the button, then I should do the needful.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you. So last time we spoke, I spoke rather generally about the importance of the spiritual master in the life of the sadhaka, and we discussed many verses from the scripture, and some of those will come up again today. Essentially, though, the guru is meant for someone who's attained the human form of life and has some interest in bhakti, is at least open, somewhat open to receiving bhakti because of past impressions, because of past bhakti sukriti. This is not an ordinary kind of good fortune that brings us under the influence of the Swarup Shakti through the agency of the guru. But it's, and sometimes we've made the point that it's not the case, not necessarily the case, that everyone needs a guru. Just as we saw, we'll see this verse in a little bit, the verse from the early part of the 11th canto. Tasmad gurum prapadyeta jigyasusaya uttamaha shabde parecha nishnatam brahman upashamashaya. Therefore, one requires a spiritual master. So that tasmat, as I mentioned before, refers to something before. It has an antecedent. And that antecedent is the sage. I need to go back to the graphic that Sakyarati and Sham put together for me. Oh, by the way, before we go any further, happy birthday, Shamananda.
Thank you.
We're very happy you came to join us in this world and in the Sangha of devotees. So, those of us who can't be there, I know we all miss you.
Thank you. I'm happy to spend my birthday hearing from you.
Oh, well, let's hope I can make it an hour well spent then. So tasmat refers to something previous, and I think it's the sage Havi. It's either Havi or Kavi, I believe. who, in answering one of King Nimi's questions, said that, you know, once we've understood the scam that is the material world, once we've come to the understanding that we actually have nothing real to gain from our endeavors for, well, as it's put by our acharyas repeatedly, bhakti and mukti, any kind of self-interested endeavor. Once we come to the understanding that these things will ultimately frustrate us, they won't actually satisfy us, then and we understand that they're really that the material world really is what Krishna says in 2 words in the Bhagavad Gita, Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam. It's a place where we suffer and everything's temporary. Now, fortunately, that means the suffering is temporary as well. But also the pleasures that we encounter are all temporary. So once we understand that, and that it's our attachment to being comfortable in this world, to enjoying the resources of this world, that is, as Krishna says, dukkha yonaya evate. There's certainly the source of our misery. That attachment is the source of our misery. That idea that we might have something to gain here after all. That is actually the source of our suffering. So to the extent that we've given up such misconceptions, then we are in need of a spiritual master. So tasmad gurum prapadetu jigyasu shaya uttama chabde parecha nishnatam brahmanir prashamashra. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So we talked about these things generally last time. And today I need, because of my missing a day, I have to discuss the first 2 of these 3 first items of sadhana bhakti together today. So the first 3, also to recap, when Rupa Goswami discusses the 64 angas of bhakti, he has it organized in a very intelligent way. So the first 10 that he discusses are the vidhi, what we might call the do's. And the second 10 items he discusses are the nishedha, the prohibitions, so the don'ts, the things, the angas of bhakti that we observe by not doing. And Rupa Goswami tells us, after this list of 20 angas, he says these 20 angas are the door to the temple of bhakti. These angas, accepting these angas, gives us access to the other angas of bhakti. And then he says, and of these 20, the first 3 are the most crucial. They all have to do with the spiritual, with the guru, directly with the guru. So, so they're guru padashrayas, taking shelter of the lotus feet of a guru. Diksha Shikshadi, accepting initiation and instructions in the practice of bhakti from the guru. And Vishrampena Guru Seva, serving the guru with reverence, as it's often put, but I'll talk more about that next week, because there are other elements to the service of the guru that are suggested by the choice of the word Vishrampa. But we'll save that for next week. So these 3 items of bhakti are absolutely crucial. They're not to be neglected. They're not to be minimized. This is how we get access. This is how we get access to Krishna Bhakti. As Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains in his Madhurya Kadambini, pointed out several times, he begins with a rather elaborate argument. Rather elaborate argument about just how independent Krishna is. And what that all adds up to is that he's absolutely 108% independent. And he does that to make the point that Bhakti is every bit as independent as Krishna. I might sometimes add, at least as independent as Krishna. Because there's a verse in the Vedas that tells us only Bhakti has the power to show us Krishna. Only Bhakti has the power to bring us near to Krishna. And only Bhakti has the power to control Krishna. Therefore, Bhakti is the most powerful thing of all. So Bhakti is absolutely independent. And she can go wherever she likes, but she has a particular way she works. She takes shelter in the hearts of those devotees who accept her ingress, which those devotees have actually caught from other devotees. Bhaktya Sanjataya Bhaktya, the Bhagavatam says that Bhakti comes from Bhakti. We know that Bhakti, we know from the beginning of the Bhagavatam, that Bhakti is ahituki. It doesn't have a hetu or a cause outside itself. Bhakti is the cause of Bhakti. So we get sadhana Bhakti from the bhaktas, primarily from the spiritual master, as we'll see in a little bit. So Bhakti Devi takes shelter in the hearts of those devotees who accept her, and those who are intermediate devotees, Madhyama Bhaktas, who have the kind of discrimination that makes it possible for them to preach. How do they discriminate? According to the Bhagavatam, they relate to the world, they relate to the beings in the world, or the beings in their lives, I guess. Oh, excuse me. Turn my phone off. In four broad categories. So they see the Lord, Ishvare Tadadineshu, his folks, the devotees, Baliseshu, the innocent. Balyam has to do with weakness. And so those who are innocent, those who are innocent of bhakti, and Dvisatcha, those who are envious, inimical to the personality of Godhead. And they relate to them in four different ways. And this, so they love the Lord, they make friends with the devotees, they're compassionate to the innocent, and they just neglect those who are envious. They don't have any bandwidth for them. They don't have any time or energy for them. So because of that power of discrimination, it's the Madhyama Bhaktas who are best suited for teaching the message of the Lord, for bringing bhakti into this world, because they're able to discriminate. They're able to get a sense of the receptivity of their audience, and they're going to speak. They're going to approach them accordingly, deal with them accordingly. So when they see someone who has some affinity for hearing, who has enough faith to stop and hear, they might share a little of their hearts with those people. And you know, see how that goes, I guess. You know, see how that lands in their heart, and help them however they can. So the business of teaching the process of bhakti, the Sambandha Gyan, the Abhidheya Gyan, and the Prayojana Gyan, the nature of the relationships among the living entity, the Lord and the Lord's different other energy and energies, and the Lord himself, that is best executed by those who are able to make those kinds of discriminations. The Kanishta Bhaktas are incapable of making those such distinctions because their vision is quite narrow. It's a kind of a religious vision. You know, God lives in my church or my sangha or my religion or whatever. And he's not so present elsewhere. Bhaktivinoda Thakur had a completely different vision. He said, when I see other people that worship at their mosques or temples or wherever, he says, I think, oh, this is my same Lord being worshipped differently by folks with a different taste. So the Madhyama Bhaktas are able to make those kinds of distinctions. And and so they share their bhakti with us. And so that, you know, we get sadhana bhakti from the bhaktas with whom we associate, and especially the spiritual master, as we'll discuss in a moment. Oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought there for a moment. And we get Bhava Bhakti through our practice of sadhana. And then it's Bhava Bhakti as we continue to practice in Bhava Bhakti, then that bud of prema blossoms into the flower, full-blown flower, and then ultimately the fruit of prema bhakti. So our life is all about the bhaktas. Sometimes we say the name when we talk about what we call our religion is Vaishnavism, which means we worship the Vaishnavas. And this is why, because it is the Vaishnavas who share their bhakti with us, who give us access to that temple of bhakti. So once we've understood, once we've actually lost faith in the material world to some degree, then we may be eligible for hearing about the glories of Krishna's holy name. One of the offenses to be avoided in chanting the name is to share those glories with those who don't have the faith to hear, because they're not going to appreciate it. They're just not going to appreciate it, and it may give them an opportunity to commit offense. So great intelligence and discrimination are required when we're preaching or teaching or sharing Krishna consciousness, however we might think of it. So Shri Guru Padashraya. Once we've understood the depth of our need, then we seek the shelter of a spiritual master. After all, we have something to learn, and our faculties for figuring these things out are simply inadequate on their own. Our mind and senses are incapable of actually approaching divinity without some help. We're simply lame and blind. So we require guidance from someone who, as that verse says, someone who, see if I can, I wonder where it is. So we take another look at that verse. Tasmad gurum prapadyeta jigyasu shaya utamaha shabde parecha nishnatam brahmanu pashamashraya. So the guru should be able to meet some qualifications. And so shabde parecha nishnatam brahmanu pashamashraya. So this is, they're familiar with the, well-versed with the science of Krishna, of Bhakti Yoga as it's presented in the Bhagavatam and other scriptures. Shabde Parecha Nishnatam. They're engaged in that kind of service, and they're immersed in the practice. They're immersed themselves in their own bhakti. So when we think about these three different angas, these three first angas, there's actually a correspondence with the Bhagavad Gita verse in which the necessity of approaching the Guru is presented by Krishna to Arjuna. And that's the 34th verse of the 4th chapter. Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. That we need to approach a genuine spiritual master to get genuine spiritual knowledge. And there are three parts to that approach: pranipat, pariprashna, and seva. So we see these three angas of bhakti as well. Pranipat means submission. And Sri Guru Padashraya means taking shelter, submitting ourselves to the shelter of the lotus feet of the Guru. And then Diksha Shiksha. Diksha and Shiksha is a formalization. And it's characterized by inquiry, especially. We're shown the process for engaging in bhakti yoga, and we're given instruction by the Guru, just how we should engage in that process. And we ask relevant questions in order to refine our understanding of what's being given to us by the Guru. And then sevaya. We'll talk more about that next week, but that's also an essential element of our approach to the spiritual master. Chanakya Pandit says that just as we get water from a well by digging, we get knowledge from the spiritual master by our service. So when we think about the qualifications of a disciple, then when we see a verse from, I think, the Upanishads, Tad Vigyan Artam Saguru Meva Bhikachit Samit Panishotya Brahmanishta. So we don't approach the Guru hesitatingly, as Srila Sridhar Maharaj says in Sri Guru and His Grace, or haphazardly. We don't make the approach in a casual way. And the investment that we make in our relationship with the Guru should not be, as Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Srila Sridhar Maharaj have said, we shouldn't be, when we make that approach, we shouldn't be cutting a round trip ticket. So we should be, we should be all in, and we're buying a one-way ticket. We're staying on the train with the Guru wherever that takes us. So there shouldn't be any hesitation. So this requires that there be careful examination between Guru and disciple for some period of time, so that the disciple will have the kind of conviction, the kind of faith that's necessary for such a commitment. This is a lifelong commitment. I think I mentioned last time that when I wrote Srila Prabhupada asking for initiation, I mentioned that I had been steady, living in the temple and steady at my practice of serving and chanting 16 rounds for some time. And my actual request was that he engage me in helping him spread Lord Chaitanya's mission for the rest of my life. And so I've been trying to follow up on that, trying to honor that sankalpa, that determination ever since. So this is a serious business. We should approach the Guru, as Srila Sridhar Maharaj says, with a clear and earnest heart. we should be sincere in our approach, because as he says, describing a verse in the 10th canto, or in the 6th canto, 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, sincerity is invincible. One who does this kind of good, my friend, Krishna says, is never lost. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj sums that up in 3 words: sincerity is invincible, which is a very powerful thing to always keep in mind. So we make that approach, and then when our faith is strong, that this is the person who can help me, as Srila Sridhar Maharaj has said in one place, which I still haven't been able to find again. When I have the conviction that I can't help taking shelter of this person, then we make that approach, then we make that commitment. And this needs to be someone we can approach, someone who can check us out to see if we're actually ready, and can say, someone who can say, oh, no, not yet. You have a little bit more work to do, a little bit more faith, perhaps, to cultivate before you're ready to make that commitment, because they can sense, our hearts kind of sense where we're at. And ultimately, we need to be able to sense something of where the Guru is at as well, sense something of the Guru's heart, so that we can become the right kind of servant. But that's next week's discussion. So initiation is actually the process of transmitting transcendental knowledge, spiritual knowledge, to the from the Guru to the disciple. In the Bhakti Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami writes, Divyam Gyanam Yato Dadyat Kuryat Papasya Sankshayam Tasmad Diksheti Saprokta Deshikais Tatprakovidai. That wise people understand initiation as the imparting of transcendental knowledge, especially the transcendental knowledge about Sambandha Gyan, the relationship, as I said, among the living entity and the Lord and the Lord's different energies. And so that's Sambandha Gyan. If you look at Srila Jiva Goswami's 6 Sandarbhas, we remember that the first 4 Sandarbhas, the Tattva Sandarbha, Paramatma Sandarbha, Bhagavat Sandarbha, and Krishna Sandarbha, all discuss Sambandha Gyan, the nature. Pardon me, take a sip of my warm beverage here. So there's quite extensive discussion of the nature of the relationship, especially the relationship between the jiva and the Lord, and the jiva and the Bhakti Devi. And then the Bhakti Sandarbha, the 5th of the Sandarbhas, discusses Abhideya Gyan, which is actually the process of activating the bhakti that we get from the Guru and the Vaishnavas. And that's so there, when we say Bhakti Sandarbha, when we take a look at the text, we see that he's discussing bhakti as a practice. He's discussing bhakti yoga, and bhakti as Krishna's internal energy is discussed in the 6th of the 6 Sandarbhas, the Priti Sandarbha. Priti means affection or love. So that actually discusses the prayojan, or the fruit of practicing bhakti yoga, which is Krishna prema. So so this is, initiation is really all about the transmission of the science of bhakti yoga from guru to disciple, and it's done through discussion and practice. And practice is such an important thing. Sometimes we say practice makes perfect. I tend not to think of it like that. I tend to think in terms of, tend to think of practice in terms of helping us make progress. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes for progress. And trying to remember if I've shared this story with this audience. There's an anecdote going around about Maestro Pablo Casals that I've seen for years. And I don't know that we know for sure that this is something, an interaction that actually occurred. Pablo Casals, for those who may not remember or may not be aware, because he is of a different era now, was in most of the late 20th century. He was considered the greatest cellist in the world. I don't really know how you figure that out, because there are so many people who play the cello so wonderfully, but Maestro Casals was considered the greatest cellist in the world most of the last part of the 20th century, maybe even from mid 20th century. And he was an elderly man when I was a boy. So Maestro Casals was being interviewed when he was in his 90s, the story goes. And he mentioned that he spent several hours a day practicing. And by practicing, he explained, I mean running scales and doing exercises. And several hours, it was like something like 3 hours or 4 hours a day, several hours a day. Practice, actually just practicing, not necessarily playing pieces, but running scales, doing exercises. And this is a gentleman in his 90s with his performing career well in the rearview mirror, way behind him. So the young journalist conducting the interview was a little astounded by this. And she asked him, why is it that you spend so much time practicing at this stage of your life? And Maestro Casals shrugged and said, I think I'm making progress. So my take on practice is that it actually may or may not make perfect. Perfection, may or may not be an attainable goal, but it certainly makes for progress, steady practice. When I was teaching college writing, excuse me, which I did for over 20 years, I would just make it really clear to my students that what we're talking about here is a skill. Like any skill, some people seem to be born with a greater facility for it than others. I could never play guitar like Eric Clapton or Stevie Ray Vaughan or B.B. King or anybody like that. I could never play basketball like Michael Jordan or LeBron James or whoever the big NBA stars are nowadays, Steph Curry. But if I go out, if I go out and do what they did, what they actually did, spend some time on a court every day, then I'm naturally going to get a little better at it over time. So I'll make some progress in being able to play basketball or being able to play guitar. So I would ask my students, let's say this is a skill, and some of us may bring some greater natural facility to this, but it's really all about regular practice. And I would ask them, when you were a kid, let me see the hands of those of you who took music lessons. Hands would go up, and then I would ask them what instrument, piano, violin, guitar, whatever, ukulele here in the islands. and I would ask them, how often did you have to practice when you were a kid? And the answer was every day, because that's how we do it, every day. So the guru gives us this everyday practice of bhakti yoga, which facilitates our spiritual progress, kram bikram, step by step, day by day. We may or may not notice the kind of progress that we're making. We can check every once in a while. A little introspection helps. But what we need to see is that we are actually making progress, and that progress is mentioned. How that progress is, that it may be measured, is also mentioned early in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam. Bhakti Pareshanupabo Viraktiram Yatrachai. This verse, one of the sages explains to King Nimi that I always think of this as how do I know if I'm making progress in my bhakti? So Bhakti Pareshanupabo Virakti. Three things happen simultaneously and progressively as we engage in bhakti. The bhakti itself, some direct experience of the Lord, and then, because of that, detachment from everything else. And the sage compares it to eating a meal. How do we know if we're actually eating lunch? Three things will happen simultaneously and progressively as we eat. Tushti, pushti, kshudapaya. So tushti is pleasure, pushti, nourishment, and kshudapaya, relief from hunger. And these three correspond with the three symptoms of progress in bhakti. And so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, discussing that verse, explains that that actually the progress in bhakti begins from the very first day of worshiping the Lord. And so he says, those, just as someone who eats a little bit gets a little nourishment, someone who eats a lot gets full nourishment, so someone who worships a little gets a little bhakti, a little experience of the Lord, and then a little detachment from other things, because he's satiated, or she satiated by their service to the Lord. So they don't, they're not going crazy looking for other things. So the Guru helps us through this process. And we see in Madhurya Kadambini that especially early on, there are bumps along the way. There are some things that we need to watch out for at the beginning of bhajana kriya, so that we can actually make progress, actually move through the stage of giving up anarthas or false values. Artha means has to do with value. And so an anartha means a false value. This means we're investing our spiritual capital, our time, our energy, our life air, in something that's not going to give us the return we would hope for. Material life is very good at disappointing us. So so the guru's business, the guru's relationship with the shishya, with the student, is to help him or her through those bumpy parts of bhajana kriya and anartha nivritti. And one of, I've always thought one of the reasons Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur wrote a book like Madhurya Kadambini was that so that we would recognize that these things are normal, that we might get a little full of ourselves at the very beginning and think we're experiencing things, we've gone places that we actually haven't, that we might find ourselves running hot and cold in our practice. Some days more excited about our practice than others. That's natural. Take note of it, but don't be discouraged by those things. Be encouraged that we notice them, so that we can kind of keep going, keep plugging, I guess, as we say. I remember when I would read newspapers regularly, there was a comic strip called, I think it was called Pluggers. And it was about people just kind of getting through life. So if we're steady, even though we may not do something spectacular, for much of our life in bhakti in a particular lifetime. It may seem that we've been practicing for many years, and we haven't like opened 108 temples or whatever, distributed a bazillion books or something. But it's that steady progress, one step at a time, that actually makes it possible for us to eventually move through anartha nivritti to nishta, and beyond that to ruchi and asakti, which bring us into bhava bhakti. So and so the relationship between the guru and the shishya is all about that, all about helping the shishya make actual progress in the practice of bhakti yoga. I think I mentioned this last time as well. There's a famous story. I think Guru Maharaj, Tripurari Maharaj, was undoubtedly there in Atlanta when this happened. This was in late winter maybe late winter of 75, February and March of 75. Srila Prabhupada went on a whirlwind tour of the West just before Gaur Purnima, and the last stop was Atlanta. And he'd been going all these different places. I think he went to Los Angeles, Mexico City, Caracas, Miami Beach, and then to Atlanta. And in Atlanta, all the bus parties that were distributing books, the library party and the BBT parties, all the devotees from those bus parties were there in Atlanta. And one of them asked Srila Prabhupada, "Prabhupada, what would please you the most?" Prabhupada's response was, wonderful and disarming and encouraging. And he said, what would please him most? If you love Krishna. So the Guru's strongest desire is that the disciples make progress in their practice. So the Guru will teach each disciple according to their need and their ability what is best for them in their practice. And this it can be an individual thing. Sometimes if a guru has many disciples, then it's something like godbrothers or senior disciples who actually do the kind of hands-on day-to-day training. But the responsibility is the guru's. And the disciples' responsibility is to be attentive to those instructions. Srila Prabhupada writes in a Bhagavad Gita purport, Vyavasayatmika Buddhi verse, that the instructions of the spiritual master, he's paraphrasing Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, saying that that this one-pointedness comes from following the specific instructions given to the disciple by the guru. This is how you engage in your practice. And so Srila Prabhupada says that the disciple should see that those instructions of the spiritual master are his or her greatest treasure. And I mean, those of us who had meetings with our gurus and gotten direct instruction from our gurus, or either in personal meetings or through correspondence, and I got a little of both from my own beloved spiritual master, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, a little bit, and those things are a great treasure. So this, we hear from the Upanishads that that's the central role that the guru plays. That we should see the guru as our life and soul. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, where this is mentioned in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, see if I can, okay. I can find that again. That the guru should be seen, as our worshipable deity and as dear to us as our very self. And what kind of faith should we have in the spiritual master? This is why the cautious period of mutual examination between guru and shishya should take place. Because the Shvetashvatara Upanishad tells us that the key to actually understanding all the imports of Vedic knowledge is to have the same kind of faith in the guru that we have in the Lord himself. Yasya deve para bhaktir yata deve tatagara tasyaite katita hyarta prakashante mahatmana. To such Mahatmas as have the identical faith in the Guru that as they have in the Lord, to such Mahatmas, all the Vedic knowledge reveals itself, prakashante. It shows itself. This is, after all, Bhakti Yoga is, after all, a descending process. Bhakti comes to us. Krishna comes to us through the agency of the spiritual master. The spiritual master is described in the Shastras as the external manifestation of the super soul. So we sometimes like to think that the ideas we get are inspired by the super soul. Oh, the super soul told me to do this, super soul told me to do that. Maybe, but we can be more certain of something like that if we check that with his external manifestation, who can tell us, probably that might not be the best approach. Maybe you should do it, tweak it a little bit, do it something more like this. So that kind of guidance we always need. Srila Sridhar Maharaj says, we're students forever. So we are eternally dependent on the grace, the divine grace of the spiritual master. So we take shelter of the spiritual master and we make a commitment to receiving instructions from the spiritual master, how to engage in bhakti yoga. And then next week we'll talk more about the nature of the service that can be offered to the guru. But I'll stop here and see if there is any discussion among our intimate little group today. Oh, does that mean I can unmute people?
Everyone can unmute themselves, Maharaj.
Oh, okay, cool. I don't have to worry about that then. Anything? Madhavan ki jai.
Jai.
Sham, birthday boy.
I had a comment, Steve, because I learned something about Buddhism recently that was surprising to me. Let's see if I find it. There's a Buddhist sutta called the Upada Sutta. Have you heard of that?
The Upada Sutta.
Yeah.
No. Wow.
It talks about something called in Buddhism Kalyana Mittata, like and Mitta like Mitra, like auspicious friendship. So that there is a disciple of the Buddha who tells him that, like he's trying to glorify this idea of friendship, like sadhusanga really, and he says like this is half of the path, and the Buddha tells him, no, don't say that. It's all of the path.
Oh wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Upada Sutta.
Yeah, I can send you the link.
Oh, that would be. Yeah, I would love that. I would love to see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a little bit different relationship with Buddhists than a lot of devotees do. For a lot of devotees, Buddhists are, because they see Buddhism as some sort of monolith, and it's anything but that. Houston Smith has wrote many years ago that there are so many sects of Buddhism with such different ideas, and some of them are at each other's throats. It sounds even worse than Gaudiya Vaishnavas are. Really. But I have some appreciation for what Buddhism does have to offer, because I have, I have a number of Buddhists close in my family. My brother and sister, my brother is a Zen teacher. My sister practiced Vipassana meditation for many years, most intensively toward the end of her life when she was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Mm-hmm. And I have a couple of cousins who are Buddhist as well. So, as far as it goes, I think it's good for us to acknowledge, the value of the Buddhist teachings. I mean, after all, what are the Four Noble Truths? We suffer. There's a reason for our suffering. There's a way out, and here it is. And so, okay, so he's only concerned with that cessation of suffering. There isn't the bandwidth in the suffering, in people suffering so intensely necessarily to deal with whether there's a soul, whether there's God. So he just says, listen, we don't talk about that. First thing is, we suffer. There is a way out. And so let's do that. Let's first of all become free. Then maybe we've got something to talk about. Just like the Bhagavatam says, this is a conversation for people who are free. Nirmatsaranam satam, right? People who are completely, their hearts are pure because they're completely free of envy. They have no self-interest. They don't have any faith in the material world anymore. They've already done what the Bhagavad Gita says to do. Right? The Bhagavatam picks up, as Guru Maharaj likes to point out. The Bhagavatam picks up in the next step and says, okay, for those who have done this, who've already completely rejected, dharma praujita kartava, same thing as sarva dharma parityaja, completely rejecting all kinds of self-interested activity, including apparently spiritual activity. So as far as it goes, I have a lot of respect for people who are actually practicing the Buddha's dharma. I like to hear from them. There are a couple of teachers who I occasionally will listen to their dharma talks or dhamma talks, depending on how they're influenced. If they're more Pali, as I've heard Hridayananda Maharaj say, Pali is like Sanskrit with a Bronx accent or Brooklyn accent or something like that. So instead of dharma, it's dhamma. Instead of maitri, it's instead of mitra, it's mitta. So I actually enjoy those. So I will be happy to see that. That's quite an amazing quotation. That's also something, though, that sometimes has been abused among Buddhists, just as the position of guru might be abused among immature Vaishnavas as well. And there's a lot of people who've had bad experience with, like, some sort of like guru dharma, and because of some of the abuse that they've either experienced themselves or seen in their brothers and sisters. That's a wonderful quotation. Thank you. That's a wonderful. You're giving in charity on your birthday, showing us how to do it. Thank you. Is there anything else?
Hare Krishna, pranams. Hare Krishna. I'd like to ask a question about the guru. Well, I have some god brothers and sisters who left Krishna consciousness. And so I was wondering if you could say a few words about that in relation with the guru, and because the ones I'm thinking of in particular had a lot of association with our guru, because I was part of that as well. And just some thoughts about that, and maybe some ways to support them. Because we have this relationship, and then all of a sudden they are not, practicing anymore, and I just don't feel right about not having some kind of relationship with them.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. I mean, I also have friends who, who aren't practicing, and that's how I prefer to think of them. Narada Muni describes this desisting from the practice of Bhakti Yoga in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto of the Bhagavatam. And in the 19th verse, I don't remember the Sanskrit, but the gist of the verse is that, well, he's contrasting with what he said. This is the 19th verse. So he's contrasting bhakti with everything else, which he mentioned in the 2 verses before, in the 17th verse, where he says that, even if you engage in the other practices perfectly and are able to attain some goal through those practices, they're temporary. Whatever you attain it's temporary, because doesn't have to do with our essential nature as jivas. And so he says, but bhakti's not like that. And then he says in the 19th verse that even if we fall away from the practice of bhakti somehow or other, we're never lost, because they'll always remember the taste that they got from that service of the Lord. And the phrase that's used in the verse for this is rasagraha. And so Srila Prabhupada, I recommend that everybody read this verse and Srila Prabhupada's purport, and if they have access to it, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, from which Srila Prabhupada strongly draws, especially in the first part of his purport on the verse. Srila Prabhupada says, if they fall away because of bad association, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, due to poor determination. I think the two are closely linked. Our association can either weaken or strengthen our determination in our practice. Just as the example that's given, I think, in Hari Bhakti Sudhodaya of the crystal, it takes on the color of its environment. So the jiva, being tatastha shakti, is very strongly influenced by the environment in which we keep ourselves. So someone falls away, they're not lost. Srila Prabhupada makes it really clear in his purport that they don't return to the world of karma. It might appear so. They might be trying very hard to imitate the karmis or the jnanis. So my practice with these devotees is just to be their friend, just to love them. And if there's anything going on in my heart, let myself be an example of the authenticity of what it was we experienced back in those days. This was a real thing, and they remember that. They remember that. And sometimes when the right kind of conversation comes up, their hearts go right back there, because rasagraha, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur tells us the literal meaning of rasagraha. Graha means haunted. So he says that once we begin the practice of bhakti, we are haunted by bhakti. He says rasagraha means haunted as if by a ghost you can't shake. In other words, we're done. Bhakti Devi, the most powerful force of all, has taken over, has entered our hearts, and she will take our hearts over. If she can control Krishna, all of our material desires, all our misgivings, all the wounds that we might have acquired through our immature practice and our interaction with other immature devotees, all those things are nothing compared to the power of Bhakti Devi. So my practice has just been just to share my friendship, just to share my love with those devotees, let them know that I accept them, that I don't, who am I to judge anybody? I mean, look at me, I've been practicing for 52 years and I'm still wherever the heck I am, Some people find that inspiring, but I know quite clearly where I am, because I've also learned over the last 52 years to be introspective. So who am I to judge them? You know, they're experiencing their experience is just as it needs to be. And the best thing we can do to encourage them is to just sort of non-judgmentally accept them. It's like family, we've got our weird uncles at Thanksgiving, and we don't love them the less, even though we might have shouted at them when they start talking politics at the Thanksgiving table or something like that. But, we still love them. Still my uncle. So it's the same, it's the same with our brothers and sisters who have given up their practice. That's temporary. Oh, I have another anecdote, a story that I love to share. And he won't mind my using his name because he's told this story himself. I have a senior godbrother named Aniruddha. He's from New York. He was from New York, and I think he joined in New York City in 1968. And he had trouble. He had trouble being steady in his practice because of the demands of his senses. And so when Srila Prabhupada came here in the summer of 1974, I was sitting in the lounge at the airport with him. Satsarup Maharaj was reading newspaper clippings about the Krishna consciousness movement from around the world. And all of a sudden, Srila Prabhupada stopped, looked up, and he said, I hear Aniruddha is here in Hawaii, but he hasn't come to see me. What is wrong? And so someone said, oh, well, he's not doing very well. He's probably just embarrassed. And then another devotee said, well, actually, because there was a small group of us sitting with Srila Prabhupada inside, and the rest of the devotees stayed outside and kept a kirtan going on the sidewalk outside the terminal. This was back in the days when, you could actually hang out at the gate with the person who was flying, right? This is before 9/11. So, and one of the devotees said, well, Aniruddha is outside with the kirtan part. He's actually here, but he's probably just too embarrassed to come see you, Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, he may come in, there's no difficulty. So somebody went out to tell Aniruddha Srila Prabhupada had asking for him. Aniruddha desisted. And so the devotee came back and he said, well, he's not feeling very inclined. And Prabhupada's became very stern. You do not understand. He may come inside. There is no difficulty. So they went back out and told him, Prabhupada really wants you in there right now. So Aniruddha came in, and he was, he had 3-4 inches of curly hair. He had a stud in his left earlobe. He was wearing a t-shirt and cut-off jeans and flip-flops. And he approached Srila Prabhupada, bowed his head, folded his hands in pranams, and Srila Prabhupada looked at him and he said, so Aniruddha, how are you doing? Aniruddha blushed and he said, actually, Prabhupada, not so good. And then Prabhupada insisted that he sit down next to him on the seats. We were all on the floor. Prabhupada was sitting up in the seats, and he insisted that Aniruddha sit down next to him on the seats. Took a little doing, but Aniruddha finally agreed. They exchanged maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes of small talk. And then Srila Prabhupada turned and looked at us and he said, in Los Angeles temple, he is the beginning. And I had made friends, my wife and I had made friends with Aniruddha while he was there. We would sometimes we would talk to him when he came to the temple, and sometimes we would run into him when we would go to the beach. And so we would just sometimes hang out with Aniruddha for a couple hours, and he would just tell us all kinds of cool Prabhupada stories. And so we had become friends with him, and we knew where his heart was, even though he may not be steady in his practice right at the time. And then Prabhupada looked at us and he said, in Los Angeles temple, he is the beginning. And if that didn't clear any misgivings anybody had about Aniruddha's position, what was important was not the difficulty that he was having at this time, but that he had done something for Guru and Gauranga. That was the essential thing. That's what Srila Prabhupada saw. And Prabhupada was aware of the other things. And all he wanted to do was encourage. So, and so I think we can best encourage such friends, such sisters and brothers, just by, I think, remaining friends. Now, if their association becomes a little troublesome, then sometimes we might want to create some distance for a while. But to the extent that it works in everybody's favor, I think that my general rule is, just be the friend that you've always been, if not a better friend now, because we should be more mature. And the devotees, appreciate that. They, oh, you're not preaching to them, you're not judging them, you're not looking down your nose at them or anything like that. You're just their friend. And if the conversation takes a weird turn, and all of a sudden you've got something to do, right? Excuse yourself. Does that help?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a wonderful question. Anything else? Okay, well, the Panchatattva are beckoning me. I'm late for this part of the morning program. So if there's no further discussion, I will excuse myself with great gratitude. And so next week, we'll come back and we'll discuss the third anga of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, which is Vishrampena Guru Seva. So I've written about this. This is something that I care about. So I hope that will also be somewhat useful discussion. Thank you so much. Special thanks to Sakyarati and Sham for taking over the hosting for this old person.
Sripad Bhakti Abhay Ashram Maharaj ki
Jai.
jai.
Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Hare Krishna.